Hi guys, here we go with video number 5. So we just finished saying that we can now use our model to answer our research questions. We talked about what kinds of questions you can use. We talked about how reproductive value is the expected number of offspring that remain to be born to each individual of a stage, discounted by the likelihood of surviving to reproduce. We talked about how in albatrosses, the final 4 stages, the adults and subadults, are the most important stages for managers to focus their monitoring and conservation effort on, if at all possible. We talked about what reproductive value looks like for humans, and whether sustainable harvest and restoration should focus on which stages with higher or lower reproductive value. And finally, natural selection will act most strongly on the stages that contribute most to the population growth and therefore to fitness. So natural selection will also act most strongly on stages with high reproductive value. So our next question is, which stages contain most of the population? Well, you can figure this out in a couple different ways. First of all, you can project the population into the future using the matrix projection tool, which calculates the number of individuals in each stage. So you might get a graph something like this if you had a relatively high lambda. Because lambda is high, population growth rate is high, the whole population is growing exponentially, and in fact, each stage is also growing exponentially. You can then divide the number of individuals in each stage by the total number of population, the total number of individuals in the population at that time, in which case you get the proportion of individuals in each stage, and you get a graph something like this. So you'll notice that after a few years, the population levels out, so you have the same number of the same proportion of individuals in each stage. So when we ask which stages contain most of the population, we're really looking for after many years of these vital rates. Again, what happens in these first few years really depends on the initial population vector. But eventually you're going to have the same proportion of individuals in each stage. So in this population, most of the individuals are going to be in stage 8. They're going to be adults, which makes sense because this adult stage includes individuals from age 8 up until age 65 or more, like wisdom. So this is what we call the stable stage distribution. The proportion of individuals in each stage once the population is no longer changing. So it's a constant proportion of individuals in each stage, but it's derived from the constant vital rate. So in fact, you can calculate the stable stage distribution directly from the transition matrix without even looking at the initial population vector. It's the number of individuals of age x in the stable stage distribution divided by the total number of individuals, period. So all of these elements of the stable stage distribution are going to add up to 1. And again, it's really easy to do with pop tools. They call it age distribution, but it works whether you're dividing your population up by age or size or stage or whatever. So here's what the stable stage distribution looks like for albatrosses. You're going to get a vector with all of the stages and the proportion of individuals in each stage. So where's the highest proportion of individuals in this stable stage distribution? Yeah, but quite a lot. It's down here, which is the same result that we got when we projected the population into the future for 50 years. If you graph it, it looks like this. So after many years, most individuals will be adults in stage 8. And last, we want to know how might management actions impact the population. So this is where you get to do the fun part. Simulations. What if I did this? What would happen? Or if I did this? How would that affect the population growth rate? It's usually, what if managers did something? How would it impact the population growth rate? So for example, in the albatrosses, how does lead poisoning of chicks affect population growth? Will lead remediation and management action help protect the population? So lead poisoning primarily affects chicks, right? It doesn't affect the adults as much. But we talked about some of the other ways that, some of the other sources of mortality to albatrosses. And the one that most biologists think is probably the most important is long-line bycatch mortality. And although, honestly, this probably does affect all of the stages once albatrosses are independent, once they're no longer chicks, fledgling them out. So probably really stages E to 8. For this model, we're just going to look at if it affects stage 8, just to make things simple. So if you remember back to when we talked about reproductive value and elasticity, we said that managers should put most of their monitoring and management effort into protecting the persistence of stage 8 of adults. That was the best way to impact the population growth rate. However, that means that you have to reduce this long-line bycatch mortality. So let's see how these two sources of mortality affect the population according to our population growth model. So if there's no lead-induced chick mortality, the population is declining slowly. That was at lambda is 0.995. But if you add in 7% mortality of chicks due to lead poisoning, the population's declining even faster, which is probably what's happening in real life, at least until they started doing lead remediation. But we're not sure it's exactly 7%, so we'll put some error bars on that of if the lead-induced chick mortality is 3.5% to 14%. And we don't actually know what the numbers are on long-line bycatch, so it's kind of tough to put that on here. But it's incorporated in this model right here because it's already happening. And has been happening for many, many years. So next, will lead remediation, removing the lead paint, help protect the population? So remember, if there's no action, we're getting that 7% lead poisoning. The population's declining pretty quickly, from 1.5 million in year 0 down to about 1 million in 50 years. If you remove the lead remediation, remove that 7% chick mortality, the population is still declining, but not as quickly. What about if you could reduce that bycatch mortality? And again, we don't actually know how much bycatch mortality there is. It's really hard to study this because it's happening on the open ocean. There's ships from many, many different countries, many of whom do not report fisheries bycatch. But if, say, we could reduce mortality of that adult stage 8 by 1%, this is what the graph would look like. So that would increase the population growth rate more than lead remediation. However, what's the problem with reducing adult bycatch mortality by even as much as 1%? Again, it's happening out on the open ocean. You get many, many different countries to agree to do something, and you'd have to be able to track whether they're actually doing it and enforce it, and that's really hard to do. So it's really hard to affect bycatch mortality, even though that really is the most important thing you can do to protect albatrosses. So the only way you're going to get the population to actually start growing is by reducing bycatch mortality. However, lead remediation does help the population, and it will delay the time to extinction. It will give the population a little more time, so that if it takes us time to reduce this bycatch mortality, the population isn't declining quite as quickly. So, Myra argues that the most important thing we can do to protect the population is to reduce bycatch mortality. But that's really tough. So we should also do lead remediation because it's relatively easy. Most of the latent albatross population breeds all in one place. It'll take several $1 million, but on a larger scale it's not that much money, to just get rid of the lead paint or cover it up anyway. And indeed, after this paper was published, remember that paper was published in, I think, 2009, in 2012, there was the conclusion of a lawsuit from the Center for Biological Diversity on Fish and Wildlife, and the Center for Biological Diversity and Fish and Wildlife reached a settlement that requires Fish and Wildlife to clean up all of that lead paint by the year 2017, I believe. And so the last time I was out at Midway in 2011, they were actually either removing or covering up the lead paint with another kind of encapsulating paint that is supposed to hold the lead paint inside for another, 30 or so years. So conservation action actually happening. There should be much less lead-based poisoning. There should be much less drooping syndrome at Midway in the future. This is amazing. Mathematical model plus lab studies plus field studies, conservation action. Very exciting. Here's a few more resources on matrix-based models and on the albatross model in general. So in a few days, we're going to be doing this lab where you're going to be reading a paper about a similar model in a different species, working together with a group, working through the model on the computer, and then presenting your own research question and results in your model to the class. So we're looking at several different species here, from trees to turtles to sharks to corals to abalone to fish to sharks to salmon to manatees. I think I said sharks twice, but anyway, lots of different species. And you're going to be using, again, this Pop Tools add-on to go through the model yourself. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.